Thank you, Jen. My name is Tim Moore. I'm from the Center for the Study of the American Constitution at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. It's great to be here. My fellow colleagues are?
I am Susan Firestone. I'm a retired patent attorney from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
My name is Lester Brooks. I teach in the history department at Anne Arundel Community College in Arnold, Maryland.
And you are?
I'm Carter Chartier. I live in North Smithfield, Rhode Island.
I'm Jackson Boivai. I live in North Smithfield, Rhode Island.
I'm Oliver Noriega, and I live in North Smithfield, Rhode Island.
I'm Sandy. I'm in North Smithfield, Rhode Island. We're freshmen from Smithfield High School, and so our teacher was O'Brien.
You have to speak
Morning,
up.
Natalie. Grace and Oliver was a little soft, so if you could speak up. Well, we'll do question 2, if that's all right with you. All right, here we go. Are you ready? One founder claimed that the representatives should, quote, refine and enlarge the public views, passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of their country, end quote. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders? What alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered here in the 21st century? You may begin.
The Declaration of Independence declared the government should be based on the consent of the governed. This was specifically a criticism of the British system that provided virtual representation.
Can't hear. Can't hear. Can you speak up?
Speak up a little bit, Grace.
All right, I'm going to restart the clock.
Yeah.
You can start from the beginning and maybe move a little bit closer to your mic.
Yeah, I am. Okay. Can you hear me now?
A little bit louder.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. I turned up my volume.
Can you hear me? It's frozen for me, so.
Yeah,
You can, there you go. You're back on now.
It's frozen for me.
okay.
If it's a bandwidth issue, you could try to turn your camera off, which would be totally fine. But you seem to be coming through okay on our end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can see you.
Yep.
Okay.
Just go as close as you can, Grace.
I'm close. Okay.
And whenever you're ready, take a breath.
Okay. The Declaration of Independence declared the government should be based on the consent of the governed. This was specifically a criticism of the British system that provided virtual representation, which contrasted against the colonial view that representatives should live in their districts and be elected annually. At the convention, the founders stayed away from the parliamentary system that was used by the British. In that system, there was no separation of powers between the monarchy and parliament, creating an almost unstoppable national government. The founding fathers knew this when discussing the forms of government that would fit us best.
During the period of state constitutions, there are many debates on which form of representation.
Oh. Lost Jack.
Jack, you kind of skipped a little bit there, so I went ahead and paused the stopwatch. If you can pick back up at the beginning of your part, and we'll see if we can get it to work.
All right, can you hear me now?
Mhm.
All right. During the period of creating state constitutions, there are many debates on which form of representation should be used. Thomas Paine believed that unicameral legislature with legislative supremacy provided the most efficient representation at the time. He argued, quote, if the people were to be sovereign, to have the ultimate political power, they did not need to protect themselves from themselves, end quote. John Adams, on the other hand, insisted that the amassed, quote, wisdom of history taught that the people could be just as oppressive as a king or an aristocracy.
If you have the call-in information, we could try to have Jack call in, or Jack, sometimes it helps if you turn your video feed off. That'll help with the bandwidth, and then we could still hear you. There you go.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, let's try this again. During the period of creating state constitutions, there are many debates over which form of representation should be used. Thomas Paine believed that a unicameral legislature with legislative supremacy provided the most efficient representation at the time. He argued, quote, if the people were to be sovereign to have the ultimate political power, they did not need to protect themselves from themselves, end quote. John Adams, on the other hand, insisted that the amassed, quote, wisdom of history taught that the people could be just as oppressive as a king or an aristocracy, and that only a checked, balanced, and separated form of government could guard against such dangers, end quote. Ultimately, the views of Adams seemed to prevail and had the most influence over the founders.
There are many different systems of representation that were proposed and considered by the delegates during this time. These included the early arguments between the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists. Anti-Federalists believed that a small republic would provide for the best type of representation because the government would be closer to the people. Anti-Federalists feared the Republican form of government could never sustain itself within a large and diverse population. The delegate form of representation they supported meant that the elected official directly mirrored the people's views and opinions.
James Madison in Federalist 10, however, argued that a large republic would be more beneficial for the United States as it would make it harder for a majority fraction to take over. He also believed that in a large republic, representatives should best, quote, refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of the chosen body of citizens. His wisdom may best discern the true interests of the country, end quote. Mr. Madison aligned his views with the trustee model. This model is where one person listens to their district and then represents people based on their knowledge and experience. This would prevent narrow interests from dominating and promote the common good of their community. Most founders favored this model because they believed the dangers of too much democracy.
Ultimately, the founders created a bicameral legislature with proportional representation in the House and equality in the Senate. However, today there are many criticisms with the use of single-member districts in the House. The first past-the-post system makes it harder for voices to be heard in the government. Because of this structure, only the winner's supporters would be represented in the government. This is really harmful and is the reason why third parties are not successful. Another method of representation is in the proportional system, in which districts or citizens elect a various number of candidates. These candidates are always associated with a political party. In this model, the political parties play a huge role in the representation. With this method, minority voices are more likely to be heard. For example, if a party gets 20% of the vote, they get 1 out of every 5 seats. A downfall in that legislature tends to get fragmented. This means the legislature splits up into multiple political parties.
When the founding fathers created the Constitution, they gave us tools to fix the document by making Article 5 the amendment process. We can use this to help fix problems with representation by enforcing certain restrictions and even change how our entire system runs. For example, it could be used to abolish the Electoral College or put restrictions on gerrymandering. So, in conclusion, our system of representation should be fixed or modified to properly represent everyone in our nation.
Thank you. I'll start out. Can you give me some details about the anti-federalist criticisms of the House of the representation system proposed by Madison?
The Anti-Federalists feared a lot of a strong national government, and that's what the Senate was doing with the unicameral legislature. So they were upset that there was bicameral legislature. They only wanted it based on proportional representation, where people would be represented by the population, and not so much they would be represented just because they would have a state with 20,000 compared to a state with 60 million with 2 representatives each.
Well, what was their criticism of, say, the House of Representatives?
Well, hold on, if you can hear me. Since they feared that a strong national government, the House of Representatives really kind of wasn't really based on proportional representation because it gave the larger states at the time, like California, more representatives than Rhode Island. And that was really just a huge fear that they had.
Okay. Susan, you want to go or do you want me?
Oh, I can go. When we're talking about the representation with not having the amount of representation, some people have been complaining that they think the House of Representatives right now is too small to be representative, as you're saying. Do you agree or disagree with this? And why not?
I believe that it is an issue because back then they weren't planning for the population of the United States to be as much as it is. The Anti-Federalists didn't even want one representative for 30,000 people, let alone 600,000, 900,000 people. So if we had a bigger House of Representatives, it would be a lot harder to get a lot of things passed. It would be a lot more chaotic, especially since they have 2-year terms. There would have to be elections nonstop, and it would just be a constant flash of changing political parties. There's just so much candidates going in and out.
Okay, let me jump in here and ask this. If you had concerns that weren't being met by Congress, if you belong to a group whose concerns were not being met by Congress, what would you do for your concerns to be met?
I think that there are many ways to get your concerns expressed to the representatives. One being petitions, which isn't really directly going to the representatives, but that can form a change.
Any other methods?
There are, in certain states, there's ranked voting, where you can either go into a ballot and you can select directly, the people can directly make a change. For example, in our state, Rhode Island, we changed our name from Rhode Island in Providence Plantations to just Rhode Island, just based on those people's votes alone on those ballots. I know there's other states like Massachusetts that also try to do that, where the people are directly changing their state and can even bring up stuff to the Constitution and bring up stuff to their local representatives to bring to Congress.
Okay. Any other suggestions? How you would get your concerns met? Okay. All right.
I'll ask another question from the 18th century. Why do you think Madison was so suspicious of local politicians not being truly representative?
I would think Mr. Madison would be fearful of that, because at the time, one of the main things that they feared was people didn't have the proper knowledge of what was going on, and possibly he would be feared that there would be a lot of corruption based on those levels. If it's just one person with 30,000 other people, and it's really not that much checks on that one person, there's bound to be some problems there.
Okay, you mentioned having a proportional representation in political parties. How would you go about doing that to institute that in the United States?
I would bring up ranked choice voting, because I feel like that ranked choice voting gives the third parties more of a chance rather than just the two main parties.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the United States should ever have directly proportional representation or should have equal representation. I think that the way that we have it now is perfect, where we have a bicameral legislature, where we have both ways being represented. If we had only one way, then people wouldn't get their views heard. And if we had the other way, regions wouldn't get their voice heard. There would be states like Wyoming, Rhode Island, Vermont, they would have absolutely no power, and there would be states like California and Texas and Maryland that would have all the power.
Do you believe that Congress is fairly representing all sectors of American society? For example, young people, there's an age issue. Is Congress reflecting the views of young people? Are they reflecting the views of the poor, the different classes? What do you think?
I think that a major problem is the incumbency rate. in America, because bringing that up, like the old people, the seniors in Congress can really have those past views. And I feel like we need more young people in Congress.
Mhm. You would be willing to run, Grace, and represent your group?
I would not run, but if other young people really reflected like minority views, then they should be willing to run.
Okay, all right. What about the poor? Are they adequately represented? Some of these senators are pretty wealthy.
I don't think that people should be classed in those type of things where if a senator is wealthy doesn't mean that they don't care and they don't support for those poor people in their states. Yes, there's a problem with the amount of how the representative gap of the pay of the people that are in the Senate and the House. But a problem is running for Senate and the House takes a lot of money. I know on the local level, Senator Jack Reed, he spent about, I believe it was between $15 million in our Rhode Island election for senator. This was 6 years ago, and the other person that ran against him only spent a couple $100,000. So I believe that really campaigning is how you get into those certain positions.
Okay.
Well, let's give you a little feedback here. I guess I'll start out. I appreciated the fact that you started out with a very theoretical statement. The Declaration raises the issue of consent. I like that. The basic issue is consent. And what that looks like is anybody's guess. So I like the fact that you started with the Declaration. That got my attention right away. And I like the fact that you mentioned the fight between Paine and Adams during the 1780s, who kind of were the go-to guys on what kind of systems to propose. So I like that. I mean, you obviously went to the convention and the plans there. I also think you use historical evidence quite well as current evidence too, and the local evidence. I appreciate that whenever panels that we listen to can talk about their particular state. Now, having said that, I guess one little piece of advice I might ask you to consider is, like in Rhode Island, I mean, your state was really, really, I'm trying to think of the right word. Your state was particularly interesting when it came to a lot of these fights in the early republic. So I guess I would have liked to heard a little bit more, especially the Rhode Island anti-federalists. I mean, those folks were foaming at the mouth. So I guess I would have liked to heard a little bit more about the Rhode Island situation and how they weighed in with these representation questions. But on the whole, I think this is a very good presentation, and you got a fantastic teacher. Enjoy your time that you have with Natalie. Thank you very much.
Oh, and I do enjoy all the history was very, very nice that you dug into in the debates. I would have liked to have more, but I know you're running out of time in your presentation to hear you flesh out a little bit more on what you would do to change, to abolish the Electoral College and the gerrymandering, other than just having an amendment. But I understand that that's a time issue there. But I enjoy the fact that you brought up the ranked voting, and you could have actually pushed that in somehow into your presentation. I might have missed it if you had done that. So that's nicely done, and how you could get other ideas in by ranking your voting. That was nice. But this was the first time I have heard somebody mention actually something involving the state government. And you have more reaching state governments than you do the national government. And the first thing that crossed my mind was constitutional convention called by the states is another issue. And I know that for changing things, and I know Lester's going to have a whole bunch of other ones that are kind of fun to talk about. But all in all, I enjoyed our time together. It was fun. Good luck and good job.
Okay. In the introduction, I like that you talked about virtual representation because that was an issue there. They were really having a sincere issue with what type of representation should exist at the time. I too like that Tom Paine reference versus John Adams. This idea that there was fear, not just from the people, but there was also fear from the aristocracy as well. Again, being from Rhode Island, it's that idea. I would echo that issue that they had some concrete issues about the convention. And so that could have been brought out. To my question about what you can do, certainly you were talking about basically the initiative, initiating your own. You talked about petitions, running for office, but what about taking it a step further? The Declaration of Independence suggests something that the people can do when their government isn't behaving the way they want. Revolt, a stage of rebellion. We've also seen this throughout the history. You could have mentioned the Confederate States of America. They didn't like how the government was addressing their concerns, and so they took it to another level. The modern civil rights movement, they got out on the streets and marched. So there were ways to do that. And of course, we have January 6th, just a few months ago. So you can go beyond just the traditional ways of handling things if your concerns aren't met. But in general, I enjoyed talking with you. Jack, I understand the computer glitches. They've been driving me crazy this weekend. So I feel for you because I know what you're going through. But it's this modern day and you guys can handle the computer much better than I can. So good luck the rest of the way.